A lighthouse stands where land resists the sea, on jagged cliffs, lonely islands, and shifting shores where waves break with quiet violence. It exists because the ocean is unpredictable and unforgiving. For centuries, sailors relied on these towers of light to survive. Before modern navigation, a single beam cutting through fog could mean the difference between life and death. Built near dangerous waters, a lighthouse warns of hidden rocks, shallow reefs, and treacherous currents. Its purpose is simple but vital: to guide, to warn, and to stand firm where everything else is constantly moving. Yet in fulfilling that duty, lighthouses are often placed in the most isolated, harsh, and eerie environments imaginable, places where the wind never seems to rest, and the sea sounds almost like it's whispering. Because of this isolation, lighthouses have long been surrounded by mystery. Imagine living alone in such a place, where the nearest human voice is miles away, and the only constant companion is the crashing ocean. The light must never go out, no matter the storm or the darkness. Keepers were once assigned to maintain these towers, sometimes alone for weeks or months. Over time, stories began to grow, stories of strange sounds, unexplained shadows, and a creeping sense that the lighthouse itself was watching. One story often told among coastal villages speaks of a lighthouse keeper who arrived eager and disciplined, determined to do his duty. The lighthouse stood on a narrow strip of rock, surrounded by endless gray water. At first, everything was routine. He cleaned the lens, wound the mechanism, and logged the weather. But after a few nights, he began hearing footsteps above him, slow, deliberate steps circling the lantern room. When he climbed the stairs to check, there was nothing there but the rotating beam and the empty horizon. The door was locked. The windows showed only the sea. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was the wind or his imagination. But the footsteps returned each night, growing louder, more distinct. Then came the knocking, 3 sharp taps on the lantern glass, always just as the light completed its turn. The keeper started losing sleep. His journal entries became frantic, describing shadows that moved against the direction of the light, and a figure he once glimpsed standing outside on the narrow balcony, staring in at him from beyond the railing where no one could possibly stand. As days turned into weeks, the isolation deepened his fear. Supplies arrived by boat only once a month, and when the next delivery came, the crew found the lighthouse operational, but the keeper gone. His logbook lay open, the last entry written in uneven handwriting. "It knows I am here. It waits for the dark between the flashes." No body was ever found. Some say on certain nights, if you look toward that lighthouse, you can still see a figure moving in the brief moments when the light turns away. Another tale tells of a pair of keepers assigned together to prevent loneliness from affecting their work. At first, they got along well, sharing duties and meals. But over time, tension grew. One claimed he heard voices calling from the sea, faint but persistent, always just beyond the reach of the light. The other dismissed it as madness. Then one night during a heavy storm, the one who heard voices insisted someone was outside, clinging to the rocks below, begging to be let in. The storm was too fierce for any boat to be near, and the waves would have swallowed anyone instantly. Still, the keeper was certain. He rushed out into the storm despite his companion's protests. When the storm passed, he was gone. The remaining keeper searched desperately but found no trace, only the roaring sea and the endless dark. After that, he began hearing the same voices. At first, they sounded distant like echoes carried by the wind. Then they grew clearer, calling his name, pleading for help. Eventually, he too vanished. When a relief crew arrived, they found the lighthouse in perfect working order, as if nothing had happened, except for 2 sets of muddy footprints leading out onto the rocks and stopping abruptly at the edge. There are also stories of lighthouses that seem to trap time itself. In one such story, a keeper reported seeing a ship in the distance every night at exactly the same hour. The ship never moved closer or farther. It simply lingered on the horizon, caught in the beam of light. No records existed of any vessel in that area, and attempts to signal it went unanswered. One night, driven by curiosity or something stronger, the keeper turned off the light for a moment, just long enough to see what would happen. When he turned it back on, the ship was gone. But the next morning, wreckage washed ashore, wood splintered and old, covered in strange markings no one could understand. After that, the keeper refused to speak about what he had seen. He continued his duties, but those who later met him said he seemed distant, as though part of him was still staring out at that unmoving ship. Some believe the lighthouse doesn't just guide ships. It reveals things that aren't meant to be seen. The loneliness of lighthouse life plays a powerful role in these stories. Being alone for long periods can affect the mind, blurring the line between reality and imagination. The constant sound of waves, the endless horizon, and the repetitive turning of the light create a strange rhythm, almost hypnotic. It's easy to see how fear could grow in such an environment, feeding on silence and isolation. But even knowing this, the stories persist, passed down through generations, each one adding a new layer of unease. In many ways, the lighthouse itself becomes a character in these tales. It is not just a structure, but a presence, watchful, unyielding, and somehow aware. It stands against storms that would destroy anything else, its light cutting through darkness with mechanical precision. To sailors, it is a symbol of safety. To those who live within it, it can become something else entirely. A place where the boundary between the known and the unknown feels dangerously thin. A young man named Arif was assigned to take over the lighthouse after the previous keeper stopped sending reports. He had heard the stories, of course, everyone had, but he didn't believe in them. To him, it was just another job, a lonely one, but simple. Keep the light burning, record the weather, wait for the supply boat, nothing more. The first night felt normal enough. The wind howled through the cracks, and the sea churned endlessly below, but Arif told himself this was expected. He lit the lantern, checked the mechanism, and sat down to write in the logbook. The last entry from the previous keeper ended abruptly. "It only comes when the light turns away." Arif frowned but dismissed it as nonsense. Still, he couldn't help noticing something strange as the night deepened. Each time the beam of the lighthouse rotated away from the ocean and swept across the land, the darkness outside seemed thicker. Not just absence of light, but something heavier, like a curtain being drawn. On the second night, he heard it. A faint sound, like footsteps on wet stone, circling the base of the lighthouse. Slow, measured, patient. Arif grabbed his lantern and went down the spiral stairs. The door at the bottom was locked from the inside. When he opened it, the wind rushed in, cold and sharp. Outside there was nothing, only jagged rocks and crashing waves, no footprints, no sign of anyone. But as he stood there, he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He shut the door quickly and went back inside. The footsteps returned the next night, louder this time, not just circling but stopping right at the door. Then came a soft knock, 3 taps. Arif froze. "Who's there?" he called, though he already knew there could be no one. Another 3 taps answered him. He didn't open the door. Instead, he climbed to the lantern room and watched the beam sweep across the sea. That's when he saw something that made his breath catch. Far below, just at the edge of the rocks, stood a figure. It didn't move. It didn't wave. It simply stood there, half visible in the brief moments when the light passed over it, then swallowed by darkness when the beam turned away. Arif tried to focus, but each time the light returned, the figure seemed closer. By the third night, he stopped sleeping. The knocking had grown constant, following the rhythm of the rotating light. Tap, tap, tap. Always when the beam turned away. Desperate, Arif decided to confront whatever was outside. He waited until the knocking began, then rushed down the stairs and flung the door open. There was no one there, but the knocking didn't stop. It continued behind him. Slowly, he turned. The sound was coming from inside the lighthouse, from the spiral staircase. Tap, tap, tap. Something was climbing up. Arif backed away, heart pounding, as the sound grew louder, echoing through the narrow walls. He ran up the stairs, faster and faster, until he reached the lantern room. Slamming the door behind him, he pressed himself against it, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside. For a long moment there was silence. Then came a whisper. Soft, close, right against the door. "You left the dark behind you." Arif didn't understand at first. Then he looked up. The light had stopped. The mechanism had jammed. For the first time since his arrival, the lighthouse stood in complete darkness. Something moved in the room with him. He didn't see it clearly, only a shape that shouldn't have been there, shifting where no shadow should exist. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against his chest. With trembling hands, he tried to restart the light, but the controls wouldn't respond. The darkness felt alive, closing in, thick and suffocating. Then the beam flickered back to life. The room was empty. Arif collapsed, shaking, unsure of what had just happened. When morning came, he convinced himself it had been fear, exhaustion, imagination. But that night, the knocking returned. And this time, it didn't wait for the light to turn away. It came from everywhere, walls, floor, ceiling, surrounding him, trapping him in a rhythm he couldn't escape. Days passed, then weeks. When the supply boat finally arrived, the crew found the lighthouse still working, its beam steady and bright. But Arif was gone. Inside, the logbook lay open on the desk. The final entry was written in jagged, hurried lines. "It doesn't stay outside. The light doesn't keep it away." It only shows it where to stand. And below that, scratched deeply into the wood of the table, were the same words repeated over and over, "Don't let the light turn." To this day, sailors avoid that stretch of sea. They say the lighthouse still shines, but sometimes, just for a second, the beam falters. And in that moment of darkness, something can be seen standing at the top, looking out, waiting for the light to turn away again. Despite the horror woven into these stories, the true reason for building lighthouses remains grounded in necessity and care for human life. They exist to protect, to guide, and to bring a sense of direction in a world where the sea offers none. Yet perhaps it is precisely this contrast, the idea of safety standing in the middle of danger, that makes them so haunting. A lighthouse promises guidance, but it is surrounded by the very darkness it tries to keep at bay. And maybe that's why these stories endure, because deep down the idea of a single light shining in endless darkness is both comforting and unsettling. It suggests that even in the most isolated places, something is watching, something is waiting, and not all of it can be explained. The lighthouse. A question for you. If you got the opportunity to work in lighthouse alone, would you accept?